2 years after vanishing without a trace on the Appalachian Trail, a young woman was finally found, though not in the way anyone had hoped. Her bones had been hidden in plain sight, built into a scarecrow that hundreds of people had waved at without ever realizing the horror staring back at them. What drove an isolated farmer to turn his victim into such a grotesque display? And how did Sarah Jenkins, even in her final moments, ensure her killer could never hide from the truth? Before we unravel this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you love mysterious true stories, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss one. She was found inside something no one could have imagined: a scarecrow. 2 years after her disappearance, her bones were discovered entangled with decaying straw fixed to a wooden cross in the middle of a Virginia cornfield. This isn't a simple tale about the risks of hiking alone. It's the chilling story of a predator who hid in plain sight, smiling and waving at passing cars while secretly admiring the monstrous creation he displayed for the world to see. The summer of 2005 was supposed to be the brightest chapter of Sarah Jenkins's life. At 24, freshly graduated from Ohio State University in Columbus with a degree in journalism, Sarah brimmed with ambition. Before diving into a 9-to-5 job, she longed for one unforgettable adventure: to hike a long stretch of the Appalachian Trail on her own. Though she wasn't a seasoned through hiker, she approached the challenge with determination and meticulous planning. For months, she devoured guidebooks, studied online videos, and carefully invested in gear she could rely on. Her bright red backpack, soon to become her recognizable mark on the trail, symbolized her enthusiasm. Sarah was strong, practical, and fiercely independent. Her parents worried, as parents always do, but they trusted her sense of preparation. She had already built a loyal audience through her travel blog, Sarah Sees the World, where she shared weekend getaways, reflections on places she dreamed of, and the promise of bigger journeys ahead. The Appalachian Trail, stretching more than 2,000 miles through the eastern United States, was meant to be her defining story. She planned to capture every step through photos and daily updates. On June 3rd, Sarah flew to Georgia and set foot on Springer Mountain, the southern gateway to the trail. As she stood at the trailhead, the air thick with summer humidity and possibility, she felt more exhilaration than fear. This was her chance to step into the life she had always imagined. The first month exceeded even her highest hopes. Towering forests shaded her path. Sweeping mountain vistas opened before her, and the camaraderie of fellow hikers reminded her of the warmth of a traveling family. Her blog radiated joy as she wrote about starlit nights, the generosity of strangers in small towns, and the intoxicating freedom of life on the move. Each post carried not only her words, but her sense of wonder, capturing the spirit of the trail. She checked in with her parents often from trail towns, her voice always upbeat and confident. By July, she had covered over 600 miles and sounded stronger than ever. On July 25th, she called home from Front Royal, Virginia, a historic town that had served as a gateway for countless northbound hikers. She had just picked up a care package her parents mailed and spoke excitedly about the people, the food, and the energy of the place. The summer heat was unrelenting, but Sarah's determination burned brighter. "Mom, this town feels like stepping back in time," she told Linda, her mother. "Everyone's so kind, and I just had the best cheeseburger of my entire life. But tomorrow I'll be heading into what they call the lonesome stretch." Linda's heart tightened at the phrase. Lonesome stretch sounded less like a hiking challenge and more like a warning. "How remote are we talking, honey?" her mother asked. Sarah laughed lightly, brushing away the concern but not hiding the truth. 80 miles without towns or main roads, but don't worry, Mom. I've trained for this. I've studied the maps, packed extra supplies, and the weather looks perfect. Service might be spotty, but I'll be fine. Linda forced herself to trust her daughter's confidence, even as unease took root. Sarah described the upcoming wilderness with awe: endless ridges of dense Appalachian forest, clear mountain streams, and some of the wildest, untouched beauty left on the East Coast. Other hikers had warned of its challenges, but that only deepened her resolve. To Sarah, this was the heart of her journey, the part where isolation would test her spirit and reward her with something unforgettable. I should be through it in about a week, she said. There's a little town called Shenandoah Junction where I'll call and update the blog. So don't panic if you don't hear from me until then. It was the kind of reassurance that only partly calms a worried mother. 3 days later, on July 28th, Sarah typed her final blog entry from an internet cafe in Daleville, Virginia, before setting out toward the lonesome stretch. Day 56 on the trail, she wrote, and I can hardly believe how far I've come. My feet ache, but I wouldn't trade this for anything. Tomorrow I head into 80 miles of pure wilderness. No roads, no towns, no distractions, just me and the mountains. She noted that the forecast was perfect, her supplies were well stocked, and her excitement was soaring. Over the past 8 weeks, she had met people who inspired her, shared campfires with strangers who became friends, and discovered a rhythm of life that felt both timeless and liberating. Carrying everything on her back, she realized, made her feel more alive than she had ever known. She signed off with one last promise. Her next update would come in a week, when she reached the next trail town. But that next update never came. And with her silence, Sarah Jenkins stepped unknowingly into the shadow of the mystery that would consume her story forever. Sarah's last blog post carried a mix of light-hearted humor and quiet resolve. She wrote of dreaming about ice cream after 200 miles of hard hiking, of cheeseburgers waiting at the finish line, and of longing for a hot shower that lasted longer than 3 minutes. She ended with words that felt playful at the time. Don't lose me while I'm gone. Happy trails, Sarah. No one realized then how prophetic those words would become, echoing like a haunting refrain in the days that followed. David and Linda Jenkins, her parents, were no strangers to Sarah's independence. She had been managing her own life since high school, and though it often made them anxious, they trusted her judgment. So when a week slipped by without a phone call, they reminded themselves of her warnings. No service in the lonesome stretch, no easy way to check in. But as the silence stretched into a second week, unease began tightening its grip. Linda found herself refreshing Sarah's blog again and again, praying for a new post that never came. David finally called the post office in Shenandoah Junction, hoping Sarah had picked up the resupply package they had sent. She hadn't. By August 10th, nearly 2 weeks since her last blog update, Linda was consumed by restless nights. Her mind conjured every possible danger: a fall on the rocks, a sprained ankle, leaving her stranded, sudden storms sweeping the ridges, or wild animals crossing her path. Each possibility felt more unbearable than the last. On August 15th, after 3 weeks of silence, the Jenkinses could no longer hold back. David reached out to the Virginia State Police, who connected him with Sheriff Tom Bradley of Rappahannock County, the jurisdiction covering Sarah's intended route. Bradley, a veteran officer with nearly 3 decades in law enforcement, knew the importance of time. He had seen missing hiker cases before, and he understood the grim truth. Every hour mattered. Within 2 hours of David's call, a massive search effort was underway. What began as a routine missing hiker alert swelled into one of the largest search operations Virginia had seen in years. The area in question spanned over 300 square miles of rugged wilderness, dense forests, plunging ravines, and unforgiving ridges. It was breathtaking country, but dangerously indifferent to mistakes. Bradley pulled together every resource he could. Virginia State Police deployed helicopters outfitted with thermal imaging to sweep the tree canopy. The National Park Service sent seasoned rangers who knew every bend in the trail and every hidden spring. Local volunteers joined in with their search dogs and intimate, a knowledge of the land. The air hummed with helicopter blades, while boots crunched across forest floors, methodically searching for any sign of Sarah or her iconic red backpack. The grid searches were relentless. Helicopters skimmed low, their cameras scanning for heat signatures beneath the leafy roof of the forest. Teams below scoured trail shelters, logging roads, and even faint deer paths where a hiker might have wandered. Search dogs were brought to Daleville, the last confirmed place Sarah had visited, where she had resupplied and logged her final blog entry. The dogs picked up her scent and trailed it straight to the Appalachian Trail, before it vanished without explanation. It was as though Sarah had been swallowed whole by the wilderness. Searchers pressed northward and discovered her handwriting in a logbook inside a trail shelter about 15 miles from Daleville. Dated July 29th, it read, "Beautiful day for hiking. Saw a family of deer this morning. Weather absolutely perfect. Life is good. Happy trails. Sarah J." The familiar script offered a brief flicker of comfort, proof she had at least made it one day into the wild. But beyond that shelter, the trail went silent. No further entries, no sightings by fellow hikers, no evidence of her passage through campsites or shelters. Sarah Jenkins had walked into the heart of the lonesome stretch, and then, like mist between the trees, she was gone. Investigators scoured the trail for answers, interviewing every hiker who had passed through the same section during that critical window of time. A few recalled glimpses of a young woman with a red backpack, but their recollections were fleeting, blurred by the sheer number of faces that flowed along the Appalachian Trail each season. Thousands walked those paths every year, and one hiker easily became indistinguishable from another. For 6 relentless weeks, the search pressed on. If Sarah had slipped from a cliff, sprained an ankle beyond recovery, or even suffered a fatal encounter with the region's black bears, there should have been some trace. Hiking equipment is built to endure, and her bright red backpack should have been visible from the air. A tent, a sleeping bag, or even scattered supplies, anything at all, would have broken the silence of her disappearance. But there was nothing. The void of evidence whispered a darker possibility, one everyone dreaded but few dared to say aloud. Sarah had not simply vanished into the wilderness. Someone had taken her. While the Appalachian Trail was regarded as safe, it was not immune to crime. Isolated assaults, robberies, and worse had stained its history before. After 2 months of exhaustive searching, the official operation was forced to shut down, though Sheriff Tom Bradley kept the case active, chasing tips and scraps of leads that went nowhere. For David and Linda Jenkins, surrender was never an option. They emptied their savings into private investigators, posted rewards, and traveled back to Virginia again and again, searching with their own eyes for what authorities had failed to find. The story flickered across national headlines, but as so many missing person cases do, it slipped from public consciousness. Yet for Sarah's parents, time froze. Every phone call might be her. Every news story about another missing hiker rekindled fragile hope, only to break their hearts again. During the early investigation, police interviewed residents near the trail, including a 70-year-old farmer named Silas Blackwood. His property lay just 2 miles from where Sarah's trail went cold, bordering the George Washington National Forest. Silas had spent his entire life on that 200-acre farm, a legacy passed from father to son for generations. For over a century, the Blackwood family had raised cattle, grown corn and tobacco, and lived off the land in a way that was vanishing from modern Virginia. Silas had married his high school sweetheart Mary in the early 1960s, but their life together ended in sorrow when she died of cancer in 1985. Neighbors remembered how her passing hollowed him out. The once warm and helpful man retreated into silence, becoming a shadow of his former self. By 2005, Silas rarely left his land except for supply runs. He no longer attended the Methodist church where he and Mary had exchanged vows, nor did he take part in community gatherings that had once defined him. His conversations grew awkward and stilted, as though he had forgotten how to connect. The farm itself mirrored his decline. Fences sagged, paint peeled, and weeds overtook corners Mary would never have allowed. Yet certain routines remained unchanged. Every spring, Silas planted corn in the roadside field, and every spring he erected a scarecrow, a ritual his father had taught him as essential to a good harvest. But in recent years, neighbors had noticed something strange. The scarecrow seemed different, taller, oddly proportioned, and dressed not in overalls or flannel, but in women's hiking clothes. Dark pants, a faded t-shirt, and heavy boots. Some neighbors muttered about the oddity, but rural communities are built on privacy. Farmers used whatever they had at hand, and if Silas chose to dress his scarecrow in hiking gear, it was his business. The crops still thrived, the birds stayed away, and life inched forward. When questioned about Sarah's disappearance, Silas appeared puzzled and concerned. He admitted to seeing hikers pass through the distance, but denied noticing anything unusual. He lived alone, went to bed early, and kept to himself. His interview with Detective Martinez lasted barely half an hour. He answered courteously, but without elaboration, even offering to let authorities search his property, though he doubted it would help. In her report, Martinez described him as a harmless old man, isolated but cooperative. And with that, Silas Blackwood slipped quietly out of suspicion, relegated to the margins of the case, forgotten by nearly everyone. There was nothing in Silas Blackwood's record to hint at darkness. No arrests, no fights, no run-ins with the law. On paper, he was nothing more than a lonely widower, a relic of another era, quietly tending his land. But beneath that weathered face and quiet demeanor, Silas was guarding a horror that defied imagination. The scarecrow that stood proudly in his cornfield, a figure waved at by hikers and photographed by neighbors for its country charm, was not stuffed with straw or newspaper. It was built upon the bones of Sarah Jenkins. For nearly 2 years, her remains had been displayed in plain sight, her final resting place not deep in some forgotten ravine, but propped up in the middle of a Virginia cornfield. Hundreds had seen it. Passing drivers admired the pastoral view. Children pointed at it from back seats. Hikers on the Appalachian Trail, visible from the ridge, waved casually toward the figure without knowing they were acknowledging a grave. Silas had crafted the grotesque display with the precision of a man who had spent his life working with his hands. Sarah's skull crowned the figure. Her spine and ribs formed the frame, her arms and legs fixed in eerily natural positions. Layers of burlap and padding disguised the truth, and over it all, he dressed the creation in Sarah's own hiking clothes. The true horror was not only the crime itself, but what came after, the ritual. Each morning, coffee cup in hand, Silas admired his handiwork through the kitchen window. Each evening, he sat on his porch, letting the last light of day linger on his creation. To him, it was a perfect crime, his trophy, his companion, his secret. When helicopters swept low overhead, their thermal cameras searching desperately for Sarah, Silas waved to them, knowing she was standing only 2 miles from where she vanished. When detectives showed him her photograph, he feigned concern, concealing the satisfaction that burned inside him. When news anchors spoke of the mystery, he smiled grimly at the television, knowing the answer was rooted in his field. The scarecrow became his obsession. In storms, he bolted outside to brace it against the wind. When the seasons shifted, he changed its clothes, replaced the weather-worn burlap, and treated it as carefully as a farmer might treat prize livestock. It was his dark altar, and he maintained it with devotion. Then came August of 2007. A violent storm system stalled over the Shenandoah Valley, unleashing torrents of rain, fierce winds, and crackling lightning. Ancient trees toppled, crops were shredded, and power lines snapped like twigs. When dawn broke over Silas's farm, the land looked ravaged. His cornfield lay broken and beaten, and in its heart, his secret lay exposed. His scarecrow collapsed in the mud, its twisted frame revealed. That morning, Jim Morrison, his neighbor from the adjoining farm, climbed into his truck to inspect storm damage. As he crested the ridge overlooking Silas's land, he expected to see downed stalks and scattered debris. What he discovered instead would change everything. Jim Morrison slowed his truck as he passed the Blackwood farm, his eyes drawn to the wreckage left behind by the storm. The corn crop was flattened, twisted into chaos, and the scarecrow, Silas's odd, looming figure, had been shredded by the wind. At first, Jim felt pity for his solitary neighbor, but something about the wreckage made him stop cold. The scarecrow had been ripped open, spilling not straw, but pale, smooth fragments into the mud. They were too uniform, too unmistakable. Bones. Heart pounding, Jim pulled over and trudged into the ruined field, the mud sucking at his boots. As he neared the torn figure, a foul stench hit him, a smell he recognized instinctively, though he wished he didn't. The reek of death. With trembling hands, he prodded the burlap with a stick. When the fabric peeled back, his breath caught in his throat. A human skull stared up at him from the muck, blank and grinning. Other bones lay scattered among scraps of fabric and fragments of hiking gear. Jim staggered backward, his scream cutting through the morning silence, before racing to his truck to call 911 with shaking fingers and a voice barely able to form the words. Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived within 20 minutes, state forensic teams close behind. As deputies cordoned off the field, Bradley walked the short path to the farmhouse. There, on his porch, sat Silas Blackwood, calm as a man enjoying an ordinary morning. Coffee in hand, he looked up at the sheriff with the same distant politeness as 2 years before. "Morning, Sheriff?" "Quite a storm we had last night." Bradley's jaw tightened. "Mr. Blackwood, we found human remains in your field, in what used to be your scarecrow." Silas sipped his coffee, then nodded slowly. "I figured that might happen eventually. Storms can be unpredictable." The casual tone, the utter lack of shock, sent an icy wave down Bradley's spine. This was no man blindsided by tragedy on his land. This was someone who had been waiting for the inevitable. Bradley's hand went to his cuffs. "Mr. Blackwood, I need you to come with me." Silas placed his cup on the railing with steady fingers. "I suppose you do," he said softly, almost like a man relieved. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the remains, confirming what Bradley already feared. The scarecrow had been meticulously built around human bones, padded and wrapped to mimic a figure of straw. Among the grisly mix, they found pieces of hiking gear, most chillingly a heavy boot still tied to an ankle bone. The connection was immediate, undeniable. Sarah Jenkins. the hiker who had vanished 2 miles from this very farm. That afternoon, Silas Blackwood was arrested. He went quietly, without protest, without emotion, without even requesting a lawyer. It was as if the burden of his secret had finally lifted. But investigators weren't finished. A full search of the property began, combing through every outbuilding, every storage space. In a cluttered barn, buried beneath chains, rusted equipment, and old tires, they unearthed a sealed military ammunition box. Wrapped tight in duct tape, it was pried open to reveal the one thing searchers had scoured the mountains for: Sarah's bright red backpack. Inside, time had been frozen. Her sleeping bag, her water filter, her journal with notes in her neat handwriting, her trail maps marked with plans, even her digital camera, all intact. It was the evidence her parents had prayed for and dreaded in equal measure. The forensic verdict was swift and final. The bones in the field belonged to Sarah Jenkins. The trail she had once dreamed would be her greatest adventure had instead led her straight into a nightmare hidden in plain sight. Dental records confirmed the truth. Every bone in that field belonged to Sarah Jenkins. Her hiking gear matched the items her parents had described to investigators, transforming what had long been a missing persons case into a murder investigation. Yet the most damning breakthrough came from the small digital camera tucked away in her red backpack. On its memory card were hundreds of photographs, a vivid chronicle of Sarah's journey, towering landscapes, smiling selfies at overlooks, snapshots of fellow hikers she had befriended, all evidence of the joy and wonder she had found on the trail. But then, the images shifted. The final 5 photos were unlike anything before them. Blurry, rushed, shot in panic. They told the story of a fight for survival. The first captured part of a man's plaid shirt and scuffed work boots. The second, a tilted frame of ground and tangled legs. The third, a glimpse of a face through darkness. And the last 2, sharp enough to shatter every doubt, revealed a man's face twisted in rage, staring directly into the lens. Despite the chaos, despite her fear, the camera had recorded his identity: Silas Blackwood. In her final moments, Sarah had done what she had always done: document the truth. She became a journalist one last time, leaving behind the very evidence that would ensure her killer could never hide. When Sheriff Bradley laid the printed photos on the metal table in the interrogation room, Silas's icy composure finally cracked. For 2 years, he had carried his secret like a shield, calm and unshaken. Now, confronted with his own face, captured in Sarah's final moments of terror, his mask slipped. His first words were quiet, chilling. She was a fighter. I'll give her that. And then, as though relieved of the burden of silence, he began to confess. His tone was flat, emotionless, like a man describing chores rather than a murder. He told the story without remorse, justification, or plea for mercy. On July 30th, 2005, he had been repairing a fence at the edge of his land near the national forest. The heat was oppressive, and the hangover from a night of heavy drinking weighed on him. Then he saw her, Sarah, stepping off the trail to fill her water bottle in a stream that cut across his property. To Silas, she was a symbol of everything he had come to despise: youth, freedom, possibility. She embodied the life and joy he believed had been stolen from him when Mary died. Watching her kneel by the stream, his grief warped into fury. Without thought, he lunged, seizing her from behind and dragging her into the trees. But Sarah fought back. Weeks of hiking had made her strong, and in a surge of defiance, she broke free long enough to scramble toward her backpack. There. She grabbed her camera, and even in terror, she did what came instinctively. She turned it on, snapping images in the struggle. She was recording the truth, even as her life was slipping away. Her courage was extraordinary. But Silas was larger, stronger, and she was already worn down by exhaustion. He overpowered her, assaulted her, and then strangled her, knowing she had seen his face clearly. He could never let her live. When she lay still, he dragged her body deeper into his woods, covering it with branches and leaves. He hid her backpack in the barn, intending to destroy it later, and tried to return to his life as though nothing had changed. But as the weeks turned into months and search teams pressed through the area, Silas's paranoia grew. He feared discovery. By the following spring, nature had stripped Sarah's remains to bone, and in that moment his mind twisted in a way few could comprehend. Instead of hiding her, instead of burying her far away, he chose to make her part of his world. In the shadows of his barn, under the pale light of the moon, he pieced together a new scarecrow, using Sarah Jenkins's bones as its frame. It was not just concealment. It was obsession, control, and a grotesque trophy that stood in his field, visible to all, while hiding the truth in plain sight. Silas Blackwood had fused Sarah's bones with straw and burlap, wrapped them tightly, and dressed the figure in her own hiking clothes. For nearly 2 years he sat on his porch in the evenings, sipping coffee, staring at his grotesque creation with twisted pride. He believed he had pulled off the perfect crime, the evidence of his guilt standing in plain sight, admired as nothing more than a farmyard scarecrow. But his illusion shattered 6 months later, when his trial began. The courtroom overflowed each day with Sarah's family, her college friends, hikers who had known her on the trail, and townspeople stunned that such horror had unfolded so close to home. The prosecution laid out an airtight case. Silas's confession, the recovery of Sarah's belongings, DNA results, expert testimony on the construction of the scarecrow, and most devastating of all, Sarah's final photographs. When those images flickered on the courtroom screen, capturing her desperate fight and her killer's face, silence fell like a heavy shroud. In that moment, every juror, every spectator felt the weight of her courage. Her parents testified, voices breaking under the strain of years of anguish. David Jenkins wept as he explained how they had clung to the fragile hope she might still be alive. Perhaps injured, perhaps captive, but still breathing. The defense made a feeble attempt to argue diminished capacity, suggesting Silas's grief and isolation had eroded his sanity. But there was no justifying the calculated cruelty of building a scarecrow from a victim's remains. The jury needed less than 3 hours to return its verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, rape, and desecration of human remains. Silas was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For the Jenkins family, justice had been served, but peace remained out of reach. At sentencing, David stood before the court, tears streaking his face, and said, "Our daughter died doing what she loved, telling a story, gathering evidence, seeking the truth. Even in her final moments, she was a journalist." His words captured both the devastation of loss and the pride in Sarah's courage. Silas died 7 years later from a heart attack in protective custody, never once expressing remorse, never offering apology, never acknowledging the depth of his cruelty. His farm was sold at auction, the old barns demolished, the cornfield leveled. A young family from Richmond moved in, building a modern house with a pool and playground, never knowing the land's grim past. The physical scars vanished, but the memory of what happened there endured. Sarah's story lived on in ways she herself would have cherished. Her blog remained online as a tribute, still inspiring readers with her voice and her spirit of adventure. A scholarship in her name now supports young journalists, giving them the chance to pursue the kind of truth-telling she embodied. Along the Appalachian Trail, a bronze plaque honors her memory, reminding hikers to stay alert and stay safe. But Sarah's greatest legacy was her story itself, a story she wrote with her courage. She set out to chronicle the beauty of the Appalachian Trail, but instead exposed a darker truth: that evil can hide in plain sight, and that evidence, if captured, can speak louder than silence. Her final photographs became her most important work, proof that bravery and justice can outlast even the cruelest of crimes. The scarecrow is gone, its field replanted, its horror erased. But the truth it concealed, and the young woman who revealed it, will never be forgotten. In the end, Sarah Jenkins did get her big story. It just wasn't the one she had imagined. It was bigger, darker, and far more powerful, a testament to how, even in the shadows of tragedy, the pursuit of truth can still bring light. Sarah Jenkins set out to capture the beauty of the Appalachian Trail. But in the end, she documented something far more powerful. Her courage and quick thinking turned her final moments into undeniable evidence, ensuring justice from beyond the grave. Though the scarecrow is gone, Sarah's story lives on as a haunting reminder of both the darkness that hides in plain sight and the strength of one woman's determination to reveal the truth. If her bravery moved you as much as it did us, share this story with someone who should hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that uncover the hidden truths history almost forgot.